After a relatively dry summer of game releases when talking about big budget AAA titles, that is changing in a big way as we are coming up on fall. Traditionally, that late summer into fall period brings you some of the biggest games of the year, and that is the case this year, quite possibly even more so than previous years. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Fallout 76, Spider-Man, Battlefield 5, Black Ops 4 all taking up all of the headlines. But one game hardly anyone is talking about, and seemingly is lacking any sort of legitimate hype, is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It seems as if gamers have already grown tired of Tomb Raider, and I really can't understand why. It's not like the games have been milked. Tomb Raider released in 2013, Rise of the Tomb Raider in 2015, and now Shadow of the Tomb Raider 3 years later in 2018. The reasoning for the lack of hype is multi-layered. You can't point to one specific thing and say this is the reason that Shadow of the Tomb Raider is lacking the hype it probably should have. Now let's not get it twisted, it's not like the game is completely buried and no one is even looking at it, but from what I would expect from a storied franchise like Tomb Raider, it is lacking quite a bit. And again, this is a multi-layered issue. However, one of those layers that is absolutely not the problem, it's quality. Both Tomb Raider titles since 2013 have been very, very good. Going back to the 2013 Tomb Raider reboot, that game was very good. It's exactly what the Tomb Raider series needed, a refreshing of what at that point had become a very stale franchise. Now with that game, we're telling an origin story, and it was great. Many saw comparisons to Uncharted, which at that time Uncharted was heralded as one of the best gaming franchises at the time, so that was a very positive comparison. I personally thought that the first Tomb Raider was better than the first Uncharted and close to quality of the second, but I know a lot of you will probably disagree with me on that and want my head for even notioning that thought, so we'll move on from that point. The first Tomb Raider ended with an 87 on Metacritic. It eventually was remastered on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and those versions have an 86. Those are very respectable scores, not at the Uncharted level of 90 up, but anything above an 85 I would consider to be a great game, at least objectively speaking. The follow-up in 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider was an even better game in my eyes. While a lot was the same mechanically, it improved on a lot of the fundamentals. Nearly every fundamental aspect from the first game, in fact. Better visuals, a bigger world with more content, a better antagonist, and it represented a truly next-gen experience, even though it was released on the Xbox 360, but let's forget about that for now. Now, while Rise of the Tomb Raider was a great game ending up with an 86 on Metacritic, there was one major issue with it. Not with the game itself. As I mentioned, the game was very good and it's hard to go wrong with playing that title. But it would be a glaring oversight had we not mentioned the fact that the PlayStation 4, which without a doubt is the premier console this generation, that's just a fact. You cannot argue that based on the numbers, and I'm talking sales numbers. If you have preference with one console over the other, or you're a PC gamer, more power to you. But the fact is the PlayStation 4 is the most popular console, and gamers that own that console were left in the dust for a year. Sure, we did get the game a year later, we got a complete version at that, but at that point it was a year-old game, and 2016 brought with it several other great games, one of them being Uncharted 4, and I think it's a fair assessment that Uncharted 4 upstaged Rise of the Tomb Raider just a little bit. No shame in that. Uncharted 4 is an incredible game, but it was almost like ROTR was forgotten about right after U4 was released, and a lot of gamers that had a PlayStation 4 almost used Uncharted 4 as a direct FU to Rise of the Tomb Raider. Now that was back in early 2016. I think a lot of people have forgotten about that, but some gamers will hold grudges over things like that. Again, ROTR did come to the PlayStation 4 a year later, but at that point it was a little too late. Of course, Square Enix was in bed with Microsoft to grant the 1-year exclusivity. That isn't uncommon in gaming at all. Sony has done it before, but gamers do tend to have selective memory when it comes to little things like this. We've talked a lot about the history of Tomb Raider thus far, and the history has been quite positive. I mean, if you take away the fact of the timed exclusivity, both games have been really, really good. But what about Shadow of the Tomb Raider itself? Shadow of the Tomb Raider, of course, takes place after Rise of the Tomb Raider. Lara sets out on an expedition to Latin America looking for a Mayan relic, which has a connection to her father. Things go awry, your typical Tomb Raider foundation for a story, but typically the stories are pretty good, so I'm sure when you play the game you will be engrossed quite a bit.
What have I done?
But how about from a gameplay standpoint? Well, it looks far more fleshed out. It has a bigger game world with numerous side quests and missions that flesh out the game's story and world. That is going to offer you a much better experience, so more content is always nice, and mechanically it's changed a bit as well, with new swimming mechanics, more tombs, and the ability to tailor your own gameplay experience to fit your own playstyle. That means making puzzles easier, and that's something I would like to see more games implement to really offer gamers customizability options in how they play the game. I'm sure a lot of developers will want to keep the integrity of game development intact, and that kind of does affect the integrity, but it's something I appreciate Shadow of the Tomb Raider offering.
As soon as this is up, we'll use it to boost your signal. What now? I got it. Okay, how the hell do we attach these together?
And surely with all that I mentioned, the game will generate some hype and publicity, and while I think Shadow of the Tomb Raider looks very good from the gameplay we've seen, it seems like not many gamers are captivated by it, and to actually captivate a gamer with an upcoming release, that's very difficult to do, and only few games manage that. Games like a new Rockstar title a la Red Dead Redemption 2, a new Bethesda open world title, a big budget PlayStation exclusive like Spider-Man. But I really would have thought that Shadow of the Tomb Raider would be up there with those games and would have managed to create that anticipation and really captivate gamers. But obviously at this point that captivation has not occurred. Now, coming off of ROTR's timed exclusive release, which I don't think every gamer has forgotten about, one aspect of Shadow of the Tomb Raider has really turned gamers off, and that is the season pass. Now, a lot of games do season passes. What makes Shadow of the Tomb Raider any different? Well, this season pass was announced and shown off all the way back in April. Come on, that is even before we knew much about the game, yet Square Enix had already devised a plan on DLC content release. That would see monthly DLC drops from October, a month after release, all the way to April. Now, I get that DLC is a factor in gaming, but this is how you decided to announce DLC being included in the game. I just think it was a complete fumble in that regard, and coupled with the already hesitancy of PlayStation gamers, that is not a good concoction at all. Well, I mentioned DLC. What is that DLC exactly? Maybe it's just some costumes. That wouldn't really matter, right? Nope, the Season Pass delivers 7 new adventures called Path, with each path including new narrative, new missions, a challenge tomb, a new weapon, a new outfit, and a new skill. The first challenge tomb will also introduce co-op functionality. Don't you think that is a bit much? And bear in mind, 7 DLC packs of that. All of that content was designated as Season Pass content 5 months prior to the game's release. Probably long before that, because 5 months prior to release was just when it was announced. Sure, I get it. It's a business and you want to make the most money possible. Even if this was the DLC structure they were going for, even if this was hammered in from the time development began. Was it the best idea to announce this 5 months prior to release? I really don't think it was, and I think that turned a lot of gamers off. Not to mention the fact that the Digital Deluxe Edition gets you access to the game 40 hours early seems more nickel and diming, but whatever. Other games have done that, so I really can't hold much against them, but all of that combined together doesn't really curry favor with gamers. The hype and anticipation for Shadow of the Tomb Raider should be much higher given the quality of the previous 2 games. Anticipation shouldn't taper off with games like it's seemingly being done here. I'm sure Eidos Montreal will end up delivering a great product, and the DLC is more of a Square Enix business decision. And I'm sure Eidos Montreal will work hard on the DLC and offer quality content that is worth the money, but as far as how the game itself turns out, we'll find out soon enough, as the game is being released on September 14th.
You need to trust me.
We have to trust each other.
He wants to alter the course of humanity. If you had that power, what would you do?
But as I mentioned, if you want to drop a little bit of extra cash, you can try it out 48 hours earlier. I've given my thoughts. What do you think? Am I off base? Are you super stoked for Shadow of the Tomb Raider and I'm just blind to all of the hype? Or has Tomb Raider lost a little bit of that luster? That luster that really should have been building since 2013, especially given the quality of the 2 games. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Sound off in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.